with me because you never know when you're going to be live or if you're going to be live or when I'm going to start the live. But hi, this is Lindy Kaiser with Clearance Jobs. Thank you for joining us for this Ask Me Anything security clearance news update. We always love to hear from you and hear from folks. So any questions you have about the security clearance process, we are here to answer it. Obviously, the hot topic that I'm still talking about, or we're still talking about, is our security clearance compensation report. I'm still getting emails, Jill, asking about compensation, the compensation report. So that is one of many hot topics. Do a shout out or I don't. I'm like, oh, hey, thank you. Hello, people. Until you say hi, users of LinkedIn, I don't actually know if we're live. So this is Lindy Kaiser, Clearance Jobs, Jill Hamilton, Clearance Jobs, and Katie Keller, clearancejobs.shop. Thank you for joining us. And again, thank you for being on this live update. What's new, ladies? Let's just banter like we're television news anchors for the first few minutes. No?
Well, this and security clearance breaking news.
Breaking news!
Well, recently I wrote it for my Ask CJ column. Is van life going to preclude you from obtaining a security clearance? And I thought Lindy mentioned that we should write about the topic because so many millennials and Gen Zers want to live out of a van and travel the world. And if we do have remote openings, especially in national security, it's a valid question. And so this subscriber to the Clearance Jobs blog, they wanted to live out of their van as they were entering the military just to avoid other cost. And so I think it's a great topic, and it may make it a little bit tricky for background investigators as they're, going through and checking off things during the background investigation. But I don't think it's an automatic no, in my opinion.
No, I think the advice we got was you just need to have some address that you could put. Yeah. Like, where can they find you? Like, right. Do you have a friend or a relative who would vouch for the fact that you're currently living in a van, not down by the river, but that you are mobile, and where is your location? Or a P.O. box, even mailing address, having some kind of like stability. Because there is an aspect of the clearance process. I do think they're looking for people who are trustworthy and reliable, and stability is not in there, but I feel like that's kind of an unwritten criteria. So I think as long as you show that there is a reason why you are living in a van, no hate on the van life, I guess was definitely a takeaway. A couple of folks have said, hey, van life, Corey. Oh yeah, let's do van life. Hashtag van life. I'm sure that's like an Instagram thing, right? Or all people posting on their social media. I get older and older as these video updates go on. Are you all hiring? Yes, we are. Search clearancejobs.shop. I don't know the current number of openings, 70,000 plus openings. So there are definitely openings. I was just having a conversation about that. The security clearance supply demand issue. I've had a lot of questions come in and chatter about the tech layoffs happening and if those are going to impact, what we're seeing the supply demand. I don't see it. Like, there are a ton of government agencies out there who are doing big pushes, but we have this. Well, we are a part of the security clearance process in the middle. So it's not like you instantly have a bunch of people laid off and then those numbers are instantly dumped into the national security population. I'm not necessarily seeing, I wouldn't expect that. Is that any other takeaways there? Katie or Jill? No.
Yeah, no, I think you're right in that, like, of course there are more people applying, but if, like, especially for contracting jobs, if you already have a security clearance, I do think that still puts you ahead of in the queue. Like, whereas, if you're applying to a government agency, sometimes it might take a little bit longer to get in, but I think all those things do factor in. But if somebody's coming out of the tech industry without a security clearance, I think recruiters might be interested in them for sure. And I think definitely apply, and there's definitely openings there. But I do still think it's their safety. And, when you have that security clearance already too, and you have the right experience to go along with it, I still think that puts you up at the top.
Pierre said he just got his TS clearance. Congratulations, Pierre. Welcome to the club. Round of applause. And that was another question that came in related to compensation, Jill. And maybe, I think I remember it in my brain, but you'll remember it better. Somebody asked about what's the difference between a secret and a TS when it comes to compensation. So you can download our report. I think there's a link to it in the description of this here. But what is that kind of jump for clearance level? Because I remember that is typically always significant. If you do get to a TS versus a secret, there's a jump in comp.
Yeah. Yeah, it's typically between 14 to 16,000 that you'll see on average. I mean, obviously, experience, certifications, education, yada yada yada, all that plays a role. What job you pick, but on average, that is what you see between secret and top secret, and then it jumps up even more with an IC clearance.
And Linda asked about remote positions. There are definitely a ton of remote positions out there. Remote hybrid is here to stay. That's in the comp report too. But if you search on clearance jobs, you can actually toggle and search by remote positions. There are a ton of remote positions out there. So you can definitely check out remote positions. GS remote positions too. Government has a number of remote positions. I'm seeing more and more of those. If the position does not require you to be currently in an office, there is a lot more flexibility definitely than there used to be. So check out those remote positions. That is absolutely an option. Somebody asked about how to set yourself apart as a candidate. I always love those set yourself, like people care about the process of applying to a job. Sometimes it seems very transactional, but I like the human aspect of it. My biggest advice always, and I'd love to get all of your advice too, is to do research on the company, because that's a big red flag to me, but I still see that come up. People don't understand the agency they're applying to, the work they do, or the company. They just see a job description. And we talk a ton about how mission matters in the national security space, and those missions are very different. So knowing what the mission of your organization or company is or does, and knowing a little bit about the company before you apply is probably one of my big takeaways. What else do you guys think?
Definitely agree with that one, Lindy. I can't even tell you how many times when I was recruiting, people would call me Kelly and just mash my names together. It's Katie Keller. But along with doing that research, I think what I've been kind of highlighting recently is just making the recruiter's life easier. You want, whether you're applying to a defense contractor or a government agency, making the process easier for the recruiters. So letting them know exactly how you qualify for the position that you're reaching out about. I have this clearance, I have this number of years of experience. Just so you're making the process a little bit quicker. Tailoring your resume so it does have the keywords that's already in the job rec, because they're going to ask you to do that anyway when they submit you to the government. So just making that process easier, kind of crossing those T's and dotting those I's to make the recruiter's life easier, and then therefore your life, so you'll get the job quicker.
That's good. I think just piggybacking on that would be, I think accomplishments on your resume as opposed to just ongoing support type of things. I think when you get on contracts, it's completed the monthly status reports. Well, what was the point of that? Highlighting actually what you did or what the goal of what you're doing. All of that is helpful. And then I think networking, I think making those connections and being open to communicating, or kind of goes along with when you do your homework and you do your research on the different agencies. Sometimes that opens your eyes to different people you can meet in different sectors. And sometimes you just never know. It just can be as easy. I'm trying to impress that even on my teenager, to feel hey, well, this person, if you're trying to get a job here, sometimes it does help knowing people, to connect to these other people and get your foot in the door.
Yeah, well, that's the community aspect of clearance jobs has always been big on that. I'm big, you don't just create a profile in a transactional way and wait for people. I mean, in this market, yes, companies will find you, but don't make it that easy. If you want to find a real career that you care about, create your profile and then also network. What I always have loved about clearance jobs is, unlike other career sites, you could actually look and see who had posted the position, a direct recruiter. And I always said, if you find a position you like, your first response should be to connect with that recruiter or send a message. And then we now have expressed interest on the site. So it's a lot just easier for candidates to kind of toggle around their interest and indicate that. And I'm always say, just throw them a bone. It's like a pat in the back. I see you position or employer. This is interesting to me. And again, in this market, that kind of activity, really matters. So taking a few steps and again, building your network, building a network of recruiters that you can connect with, being active on a place like Clearance Jobs, being a part of our communities and ecosystems here, I think is great. Yeah. And, Chanel asked that, how do you network with hiring managers? Looking again, on Clearance Jobs, looking at those positions, kind of connecting the dots, researching an employer, finding out who in your existing network works for that employer, all of that stuff can really, really help. Stephen asked a question earlier that I had to flag. How do I use my did you see that? How do I use my connections in Iran to help me find a job? And I'm like, I mean, Stephen, it just depends on how you want to use those connections. He has some in Greece and other places too. But it does point out, like, we do want people with international expertise. So, I mean, I can't answer specifically how you can use your Iran connections. Again, I can think of a few ways, counterintelligence wise, depending on what those are. Maybe contact the FBI. I don't know. But we do want folks with international skills and experience. But when it comes to those connections, like the foreign influence piece, when it comes to applying for a security clearance is there. So I don't know if a pivot within that is that piece of it. Because if you have close continuing contacts with people in those countries, you do have to report those in your SF-86. So that's something that, like, there's an update. The PDQ is coming out. The questions and criteria around foreign influence and what is a close and continuing contact have not gotten more clear. It is still a bit of a minefield when it comes to foreign influence and foreign contacts. So those have to be reported on the SF-86 if they're close and continuing. You will get questions about those. If there's not a bond of affection, if you're not sending money overseas, there's a lot of things that can level that off. And again, fortune favors the patient when it comes to the clearance process. So my biggest thing is, even if you have a ton of foreign contacts or something, or we've had questions about DUI, debt, a lot of those, almost anything can be mitigated in the clearance process. So what we love all doing our jobs is because, like, people ask us all kinds of nuanced questions about the clearance process, and almost like 99.9% of the time we can say, it depends. And they're like, you're welcome. Because that's true. Like, we can't definitively tell you. If you are willing to go through the effort, you have a high chance of being able to obtain a security clearance, regardless of, again, all those kind of nuanced questions about debt, DUI, other factors. There's not a single red flag issue. If you are patient, if you are prepared, and if you research, you have a good chance of applying. Is there any other takeaways on that, ladies?
I was going to say, especially with international experience, if you're interested in obtaining a security clearance, like you said, Lindy, from the security clearance perspective, but from our hiring perspective, a lot of agencies and a lot of defense contractors are looking for those people. So they may be more inclined to sponsor you if it's a Chinese linguist position that has been sitting open for a good amount of time. So just like I said, from a job seeking perspective, those may be good positions to target if you're interested in getting in national security. If we could pivot, I did see somebody ask a question about how to find keywords when it comes to job requisitions. And so if you are applying to a position that pretty explicitly says you need experience with the NRO, and that's not something that you would particularly list on your resume because you may be liaised with them in some way, that's something that you would definitely list if it says, required to have NRO experience. Again, even if you wouldn't have it on your resume from other positions you applied to in the past. But sorry about the pivot. I just had to answer that one.
Pivots are my favorite, Katie. Kelly, what are you talking about? No, I love a nice pivot. We've had a few questions come in. I always love to see these because this shows folks are still following us, even if they're outside of the clearance community right now. So a few folks who have had lapsed or expired clearances asking how long they last. 2 years is still that magic date that I see from if you have left your clearance and before it does lapse. So it's not the investigation time. So people ask, well, hey, a secret clearance is good for 10 years. So I have 10 years. No, it's 2 years from a separation of position and getting back in. But the good news is clearance processing times are improving. So across the board, you see, between 80 and 120 days for a secret to a TS clearance within DoD industry specifically. Clearance processing times can be, slightly better for the government side of it, slightly worse a lot worse for the IC side of it. So it just depends on a lot of different factors. But interim clearances are being granted an average of like a week for DoD specifically. So if you're able to find a company, and there are a lot of companies willing to sponsor. So I always say use those search criteria: willing to sponsor, clearance sponsor, clearable, list your prior clearance on your resume. It doesn't necessarily help because a lot can happen in 10 years. And that's why we have continuous vetting now, because we know that can happen. So just because that 10 year, who knows, a lot of life can happen. But having had that previous clearance shows that you know the process. It shows you know what you're getting into. And I do think it makes you a more clearable candidate for some of those employers considering positions. So there are good opportunities for getting back in. And it's not necessarily, it's not a no-go that you're not gonna be able to obtain a position fairly quickly. Any other takeaways on the lapsed expired clearance question that we always get?
No, I think that was good. I think there were a couple too, like how do you find somebody to sponsor you, things like that, which like you said, just looking for companies to say willing to sponsor or and listing that you're, if you have a, if you know that you're not that you have to be issue free, right? But like, if you're like, I'm able to get a clearance, when you see that, everybody has their issues.
So, you have no idea, Jill. No, I'm always like, what? I'm not perfect.
So many issues over here.
Yeah.
Allow
so I
me
think
to
it's
list
just
out
good,
all
like
the
you
reasons
can
I
do
should be
searches.
denied a security clearance on this live call.
Let me but count the ways.
I was gonna say that's when if your clearance has lapsed, just be willing to maybe take a lower clearance. I know that if you previously had a TSSCI, maybe target positions that are in your field or niche that are at the secret level, and maybe employers are going to be more inclined to sponsor if you're trying to get back into national security. That might be an easy way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah. Ray asked if your security clearance has to be managed after you get it. Yeah, someone should be keeping track of your clearance, Ray, because who knows? You've seen from us, we're shady suspects, and people need to keep track of whether or not we should still be clearable. So there is always a CSO or an FSO or a security officer that's in charge of maintaining that clearance. They should also give you updates on your clearance process. So as you're going through, if there's ever like a statement of reasons or a letter of intent to deny a security clearance, you're going to get that from the federal government or get some information from your CSO or FSO on that. So there is a process. Clearances are granted by the federal government. That comes up. You cannot obtain your own clearance. The government has to sponsor you for that clearance. And it is not something you can obtain on your own. And yeah, the other question, Adam's answered questions for me. Thank you, Adam. Shout out. So public trust versus security clearance. A public trust is not a security clearance. It is a position of public trust. Now, the vetting criteria for a high-risk public position are almost identical to that for a secret security clearance. So as we roll into 3 tiers and we kind of, through Trust Workforce 2.0, do some simplification of the clearance process, I think what we will see is kind of an easier clearance transfer from some of those positions of public trust. But public trust is a completely separate category than the actual security clearance process. The forms are actually different and the process is different. Ask me how I know. It's because I had a public trust and I thought I had a secret security clearance for 6 months when I worked in the Pentagon. So that's always like my claim to fame. And then I got hired by clearance jobs. So it just shows out of the ashes, people can come your career success. I used to not know what a security clearance was, and look at me now. Should I admit that? No?
It's great.
No.
It's great.
Can you explain what an interim clearance is?
No, I thought it was
Go ahead, Jill.
No, go ahead. No, I just was gonna say it was an interesting question on, is volunteer work counted as continuous service for clearance purposes? And it's really just like, it kind of piggybacks on what you were saying. Like, it just matters who owns it. If it's cleared volunteer work,
Sure.
that's the new one, then that's fine. I mean, it's continuous work, but it wouldn't be like, it's like if there's no one owning your clearance and you're actually doing work under that, then it wouldn't really keep that clock going if it's after that 2-year mark. Yeah. So, but I just think it's all the interesting questions always like come up, we're all different.
Well, I mean, I think it's good because there's the 2 separate pieces of it too. Like, I think listing volunteer work on your resume is fantastic. Like, if you had a break in employment, I think people sometimes fail to realize all of the different things that factor into life that really kind of demonstrate your aptitude and your propensity. And I see this, with a lot of folks, I think, taking a break post-COVID, maybe from employment, saying like, hey, it was too hard to keep track of kids and family situation. And maybe one member of the family took some time off and said, hey, I'm not going to work for a little bit. My guess is there's a lot of work happening that would show a lot of skills that would be very relevant in terms of another position. So volunteer work or other involvement or other things you're doing can certainly be things worth listing. They're not going to help you with your security clearance, at all unless you're like volunteering for military service. But that was a question that came to, like, hey, I don't have any prior military experience. Can I still do this? Yes, absolutely. I'm a big advocate. I love the military. Nobody loves the Army more, but we need all people within this ecosystem. And I think some people get the false sense that you have to be prior military service to work in the defense industrial base, or that those are the vast majority of positions. But they are really looking for the most qualified candidate. So if you don't have any prior military experience, the national security community is still here for you. And that's a big takeaway for a lot of those folks leaving the tech space. Mm-hmm. I would love to see this huge influx of new ideas, people who have never considered the federal government before. Now is your time, because we have a lot of openings. Clearance processing times are improving. So let's get some new talent into this system.
I was going to say tech, certainly, but also R&D, a lot of academia, science and technical. Mm-hmm. I mean, the DoD and the IC are always looking for those kinds of minds and folks. And I know those were the hardest positions for me to recruit for, because those types of candidates didn't necessarily have a clearance already. So like Lindy said, processing times are in your favor. So if you are within that world and you're kind of toying with national security careers, we could definitely use you. So.
Yeah. And I think, looking into positions, like there are a lot of positions out there that aren't in those same typical things that you might expect. So if you have some interest or aptitude around anything, search at Clearance Jobs. We probably have a position that might be relevant and might be a good fit for you. So check it out. I think there's a lot of hiring opportunities right now.
I just got a cool story, bro, from Peter. He just said cool.
Cool. Hey, Peter. I appreciate it. I'm all about the positive affirmation. I have naturally low self-esteem. So Peter, just tell us, great job anytime. We'll take it. Anyway, I think I'm about at the end of my spiel. Any other questions that came in that you ladies saw that we didn't get to today? I thought there was one more, but it was in my brain for a minute and then I forgot it.
It was on interim clearances.
Oh, yes. So yeah, people ask what an interim clearance is. An interim is like a temporary clearance. So it's just saying, hey, we're giving you interim eligibility before your final determination is done. There's typically a few automated checks that can be done to do that. That's why it can be processed so fast. Not all positions you can work in with an interim clearance. The IC does not do interim clearances whatsoever. So those are only, DoD or other agencies where you can get those clearances. So interim is just an option to get you onboarded fast. Oh, and somebody asked about the other question I wanted to address was, why do they require clearance to get started? That just comes down to, if you need to access classified information for your position, they're going to require you to have that access before you get started on the job. I have this new theory. I just came up with it this morning before I had too much coffee.
Oh, excited to hear.
Gap employment, like gap years. Like, what can we do to better create onboarding to say, if you're waiting for the clearance process, contractors can't afford to keep you on the bench. What does that gap employment window look like? Or creating, like, we have so many things we can do with technology enablement to kind of stovepipe out what is classified and what is the unclassified part of the position. How do we create these better frameworks to say, like, hey, I need a 6 to 12 month temp job while I'm waiting for my IC clearance. What can you do for me? Like creating more like temp job structures, but specific to, I'm in the process of waiting for a security clearance.
I mean, I think that's definitely doable for a ton of DoD programs, because they're working on the open source for certain products and things anyway. So I don't see why people don't employ that tactic more. I think companies could definitely do it. I'm not as sure on the government side because I've never supported the government directly, but contractor wise, I definitely think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I do think the government's a little bit more cut and dry with, like, this is the billet that we're hiring for. Whereas, when you're on for many contractors, especially like I worked for a contractor who was matrixed. And so that means, like, they had graphic designers. You could work on uncleared work and cleared work. So if you were waiting on your clearance to come in, you could do all these other programs over here until things rolled in, and then you moved on to that program. So things were just a little bit more parsed out in that. I think freelancing, if you have a field that you can take freelance work where, if you work in IT or you work in something where you can take on short-term projects, that could actually, before you get hired, be like, yes, I will be ready to start this day. As soon as this comes in, I'm here for you. I'm your person. But, and then have, your side. I mean, obviously, it all has to be reportable, all those things. Don't forget to cross your I's, pay Uncle Sam, cross your T's, dot your I's, all that stuff, But I think there's a lot of freelance work out there, even in national security, that doesn't require a security clearance, that you could take on while you're waiting for your clearance to come in.
Awesome. Fantastic. May the clearance odds. I'm like trying to, what are some St. Patrick's Day slogans I can go with? I'm a sucker for a holiday. It's not St. Patrick's, close. Top of the clearance morning to you people. Hey, this is a conversation I have with my kids. My kids are like, hey, St. Patrick must have been really lucky, wasn't he? I was like, he was martyred. Was he lucky? I don't know. LinkedIn people tell me, or like people like St. Patrick, was he very lucky? Even though he was martyred? I don't know. A little history lesson for you. I will remove
I don't know.
that.
St. Patrick's Day just always meant corned beef and cabbage for me growing up. I never really actually gave a second thought on that, and Reuben sandwiches, So
I'm wearing my clearance job swag. Go to clearancejobs.shop, right, Katie?
Yeah.
Got your squirrel. So for this
my
morning,
dog toy.
The good news is it's still like 30 degrees in Nebraska, so you can probably wear your hat for another month. Or you can not. Or you can wear it all summer like the kids do these days. They wear shorts all winter and stocking caps all
hipster.
Summer. That's what hipsters.
Yeah, hipster. I don't
know. Hey, somebody said go for the green. That's what you should
Classic
say.
St. Pat's Day. Thank you. Thank you for the advice. Anyway, on that note, any question for the clearance process, go to clearancejobs.com. Check out our content. Thank you again so much, Katie and Jill, for being on with me today. And yes, good luck in all of your career job search missions.